Yo, welcome to the Gig Life Podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. No guest today. This one's a bit of a pause and look around moment, a wee bit of a year in review. Stick around and I'll tell you some of the behind the scenes stuff and some of my personal takeaways from a few of this year's interviews. I'll also answer some listener questions and let you know what's happening in 2026. This is all set up in chapters in your app, so you can skip and bounce around to whatever section you want. This is episode 168, 2025 review and Q&A. Here we go. I think we're rolling. I'll start with a few stats and some notable production changes from 2025. This won't take long, so stay with me. In 2025, the Gig Life podcast released 19 new episodes. 4 more interviews were recorded in 2025, though they will be released in 2026 as I ran out of time. 23 hours and 18 minutes of my guests and I in your ears. My apologies. Largely listened to in Australia, New Zealand, USA, Brazil, UK, India, Germany, Malaysia, Indonesia, Russia, Mexico, Argentina, Japan, Singapore, Turkey, Spain, and France. I mean, what? That's crazy. The Gig Life podcast changed hosting providers from Podbean, which we'd been with since 2018, to Captivate. And the reason behind that change was that Captivate offer far better tools for podcasters, making things faster, including a guest booking function, which has saved me so much time this year. I created a brand new website for thegiglifepodcast.com. If you haven't seen that, go and have a look. And that's it. We're done with the stats. All right, 2025 interview highlights. So here's some behind the scenes and some notable moments from me from a bunch of this year's interviews. The first one. So episode 153 was with Andy Pickers. Now, I met him at his terrace house in Darlinghurst. This multi-level place had like a stage podium type area up one end. Yeah, really cool house. Always cool talking to a fella Kiwi. Broke the ice with some rugby talk. He's had a hell of a career and he's a bloody good dude. I got Andy to dig deep into the mechanics and the physics and the physical toll of playing saxophone. So that was really interesting for me to hear that stuff. And I took away a lot from that. Episode 155, well, Hamish Stewart returns. So back out to Hamo's house in Manly, but this time it was for lunch. He makes a mean pasta. And it's always a musical lesson for me when I hang with Hamish. For me as a drummer, it was a masterclass, and as a musician, there's a blueprint there. And for someone who loves great music, this was a reminder of how much care and thought goes into making music feel effortless. Bonus episode, Everyday People interview with Stevie Taylor. Now this was cool. A bit strange, but it was cool. I got contacted by an old friend from my hometown in Masterton, New Zealand, and she asked if I could come on as a guest on her show, on her radio show. She wanted to know a little bit about the podcast and all that sort of stuff. So, I realised how different it is being on the other side of the glass, so to speak. I've always been the one asking the questions. I walked away with a completely different perspective, a respect and more of an understanding of the interviewees. Episode 157, Chris Camzelis. Well, when I first had the idea of this podcast in 2018, I created a new note on my iPhone titled, Who I'd Love to Talk To. And there were 10 people I put down on that list, and Chris was one of them. It took us 7 years to make it happen, but once we booked it, we had to reschedule 3 weeks in a row because we both got sick. So anyway, finally it happened, and I drove out to his beautiful house in Sanssouci, and it was really worth the wait. Got to hang upstairs in his studio where he played me some music that he'd been producing, and just a really cool hang. I drove home buzzing from that conversation, and I really love it when that happens. And it was nice to tick another one off the guest hit list, so to speak. Episode 158, well, Ellie Foster. So this was at Wentworth Point Library, and it was the night of the Katy Perry concert. So me and my overthinking, anxious mind messaged Ellie during the day saying that she needed to leave really early as the traffic will be really bad and you won't get a park and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, get there early because there's no traffic as the concert had already started. So that's me, overthinking to a point where I think I have it all covered, but it never actually looked at the concert start time. So, I hadn't met Ellie before. We had tried to organise a podcast a couple of times beforehand, but it never really happened. So sometimes you just meet people and it's like you've been mates for years, and that was certainly Ellie's vibe. Another thing that stands out for me from that conversation with Ellie, and if you listen to that episode, you know what I mean. I have this thing where if I hear a song and it really hooks me, I'll become obsessed with that song, and it's the only song I listen to and nothing else, sometimes for days, for weeks. Only that song, and everybody has that, right? Right? Of course they do. I had been having this obsession with a Pat Metheny song at the time, and as I was driving up to meet Ellie, I had this epiphany where, hey, maybe not every musician gets obsessed with songs like I do. Okay, well, I'm going to ask Ellie this during the interview, and when I started asking her about this, well, the look on her face, her reaction was gold. Boom, shut me down, unapologetic. No, it's you. Not everybody thinks about songs like that. So anyway, me problem. Episode 159. Man, this is Brett Garsed. Now, if you know who Brett is, he's the legendary guitar player for John Farnham. Now, I walked away from this saddened to see that he struggles to get a gig now that Farnham's off the road, and that he's living outside any sort of musical hub or city. You know, it's a thing, right? Players spend so much of their career with an artist, and once that artist isn't there anymore, they struggle. The reason I created this podcast was to showcase and celebrate our local musicians. Makes me think about what more we can do for the legacy of these guys once the work dries up and slows down. I don't know. What do you think? Episode 161, Luke Davison. Well, Luke and I organised to meet at his studio in Camperdown. I hadn't met Luke before up to this point. So driving in there were roadworks in the area, so really limited parking. I parked a few streets away and walked around to the studio. I come out of this alley, no one else around, it was dark, and there's this dude, big tall dude, leaning against the wall, and I'm thinking, oh shit, here we go. He's looking down at his phone. I'm looking at him. He looks up and goes, "Hey, Stevie." "Hey, Luke, good to meet you, bro." Hanging with Luke that night has become one of my favourite conversations of the year. He's going to be in this music game for a long, long time. So if you want to know why, go and check out that episode. And that concludes the interview highlights. Time for a Q&A. Over the last quarter of 2025, I ran a listener survey via the giglifepodcast.com to get your thoughts as a listener on the show and what we can do to improve and what you'd like to hear and what you didn't like, blah, blah, blah. One thing that came up a number of times was, can I do a Q&A episode? Well, I'm not going to do a full episode on that, but I will answer a bunch here today. These are a bunch of questions from the Gig Life Podcast Facebook and Instagram, and also from the listener survey. First one is from Nick on Facebook. Have any guests shared words of wisdom that have stuck with you since their interview? Well, there's a real standout here, and this was right back in 2018, very, very early on in the podcast. I had a conversation with the great bass player, Victor Rounds, and he said this.
Musicians, I mean, I keep saying this all the time. We're like bloody cockroaches, mate. You know? Yeah, we are. You know, the economy can have a downturn, or it could have a boom period. It doesn't affect us. Even when it does have a boom period, it doesn't affect us. We're still gigging and we still get the same pay. You can't go to your employer and say, "Oh man, isn't the economy great? You know, I don't know, $100 and I get stuff." You know, whereas, but you know, even in a downturn in the economy, who's still working? Musos, even if it's the odd gig here and there. Like I said before, we're cockroaches. We come out of the rubble, we dust ourselves down, and say, right, where's the next gig?
Just so true, eh? Since that interview, there's been a number of times where I've interviewed people and they have brought up Victor's cockroach reference. You know, we've had the lockout laws in Sydney, which limited musicians. Cockroaches came out, dusted themselves off, found a gig somewhere else. COVID shuts the music industry down. Basically, musicians, cockroaches, come out from under, dust themselves off, create new situations. So, yeah, this has been the one thing that's stuck with me the most through the whole time I've been doing this podcast is Victor's musicians are cockroaches. The next question is from Marty on Facebook. Tell us about your biggest surprise in this year's interviews. Well, this one's easy. Joel Hunt. Now, episode 162, I interviewed a gentleman called Joel Hunt. He contacted me asking, or he sent me his music and said, have a listen to my music. If you think it's cool, can I come on the show for a chat? Well, I played his music and I was absolutely floored. Where has this guy been? He's been under a rock or something. Just sort of undiscovered, man. Like, yeah, go and listen to the interview, listen to his music. I think he's amazing. So Marty, that was the biggest surprise from this year's interview. So I hope that answered your question. This question is from Kurt, who sent a request via the website contact form page thingy. Will you be making a video version of the Gig Life podcast for YouTube? Because it seems like everybody else is. Well, probably no. Having a camera pointed at your face, in my opinion anyway, it takes something away from the conversation. And when the guest and myself are also thinking about how we look, it kind of, I think anyway, it takes away from the conversation. Another reason to do video, it takes, extra time and extra resources to have a video, and I just don't have the time for that. I work full time. I've got a family and all that sort of stuff. And 3, look, I listen to podcasts in my car. I listen to them on my earbuds while I'm exercising and while I'm working. And I made a podcast that I wanted to listen to. And in all those environments, not a podcast I want to watch. So, okay, it seems like everyone else is doing it, making video podcasts. Well, cool for them. You will not see the Gig Life podcast as a video podcast on YouTube. And the final question for today, this is from Nate123 on the Instagram. Can you explain your podcast episode process and what gear you use? Well, this is a cool question because I love gear and I love tech and it gets me excited, so I'm happy to share. I could geek out on this stuff for hours, but I'll try and keep it pretty brief. So for recording, I have a mobile recording setup where I go out for one-on-one interviews, and I also have a remote recording setup, which I do from home. So I'll start with the mobile one. So I have 2 Rode Pod microphones, which plug into a Zoom PodTrack P4 interface. I also have a little Bluetooth receiver connected to the PodTrack, so I can bring in music and stuff that might be on my phone. All those files are recorded onto a SD card inside the PodTrack. For the remote recording from home, I use Riverside, which is a little bit like Zoom, but the audio quality is much better, and there are a few other cool features I like to use in Riverside. The guest audio is uploaded at quality into Riverside, and I can download the files from there. From my end, I have a Rode Procaster microphone, which goes into a Rodecaster Pro 2 interface. All the audio from Riverside also goes into the Rodecaster Pro 2, and it's saved onto a SD card as backup. Now, editing and mixing. So I use Logic Pro as my digital audio workstation. This is where I do all my editing and mixing and bounce everything out from there. I've been using Logic since I got my first Mac back in about 2005, I think it was. So Logic's like home to me. I upload the SD card files and the Riverside files onto Logic, and then I go from there. I have a few favourite plugins I like to use when required, but, that's all horses for courses, of course. Of course, and nobody... Shut up. Then everything is bounced out as a stereo MP3. The MP3 is then uploaded into Captivate, which is my hosting provider, and with the episode cover art and the show notes and that kind of stuff, and then it's published, and then that's when it ends up in your podcast app. Well, I'm going to close this off now with a big thank you to you for being a listener of the Gig Life podcast, and your support. The show doesn't happen without you, the listener. 2026 is going to be cool, man. Like I said, I've already recorded 4 interviews that I couldn't get out in 2025. They're really exciting. Plus, I've got interviews booked already. There's some awesome guests coming on. Not going to tell you who they are. You'll just have to guess. Now, if I can ask you for one thing before you go today, one thing before you sign off for the year, and this is going to cost you nothing, can you please share the Gig Life podcast with one person, be it the giglifepodcast.com website or maybe your favourite episode in your app? Share it out. Let them know why you dig the show, and maybe they'll jump on for the ride as well. So that's it for me for 2025. Thanks again. Be well, be safe, and I'll catch you real soon. Cheers.